Okay, so hi everyone, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator of the panel discussion this afternoon. And about the topic, so I believe that the topic of this discussion is one of the most important key success factor of every financial market, not only crypto, is the liquidity. And around me here, all are global leader from blockchain industry. And so our speaker, so thank you for spending your time and joining us in the RWA Summit in Vietnam. And can you please share briefly about yourself and your company, and what is your view about the potential of Vietnamese market? So please from Mr. Teddy.
Yeah, thank you, Huang, and great to meet everyone again. I still recall last year, around the same time I was here. So I've been seeing a lot of great development in Vietnam. I think last year when I was here is for VChain, which is really a great function that I see a lot of great talents. But to your question, Huang, who we are and what we see the Vietnam opportunity is, I'll share the following. This is Teddy. I'm heading the business development and advisory function at Solana Company. Solana Company is basically an investor and also a service providers. We are listed in Nasdaq. We wasted roughly 500 million last year to invest a lot of those in Solana. We are basically a long-term believer in Solana on that being an infrastructure for the financial institution, which I'll touch on a bit on the liquidity pieces. We also have an advisory role, which is supporting a lot of the financial institutions to use the blockchain effectively for value-added use cases and make sure the delivery happens real time, fast. So that's something we do a lot. But in terms of Vietnam opportunity, I think I actually spent a lot of time in Hanoi, as Huang and many of you may know. I do think Vietnam is a country with a lot of talents in the technology side. And it's super young, and like we said just now, it's probably the second largest crypto adoption market. So people know the technology already. The potential I see is how do we make sure regulation and compliance work together to make sure it actually creates the liquidity we want. I'll pass on to the next.
Please, Mr. Ramana.
Thank you so much. I'm Ramana Kumar. I'm the president of Stablecoin Ecosystem for ADI Foundation. ADI Foundation is what I call the only sovereign institutional grade blockchain funded by Abu Dhabi. More than that, we host one of the most regulated stablecoins, which is issued by the Central Bank of UAE, called Digital Dirham Stablecoins. We also, I'm sure most of you would have watched Football World Cup. You would have seen ADI Predict Street, which is one of the products launched, the globally first prediction markets for FIFA, which is one of the products. I'm not going to talk about that for sure. I handle the stablecoin and the RWS. Many people ask me, why Vietnam? I don't know how many of you know, UAE and Vietnam are the largest trade partners. We are an institutional chain. We run where the money is, where the institutional flows are. And I'm very happy to be here in Vietnam because through this forum, I wanted to bring that concept of how the institutional flows, a trade finance, a cross-border payment, a tokenization of receivables, how do we make it happen? And I'm very excited about the potential because UAE and Vietnam has signed the SEPA agreement very recently. Very excited to be here. Thanks for calling me in.
Thank you. And Mr. Thomas.
Thank you so much. My name is Thomas. I'm with Canton Foundation. For those who don't know who Canton is, right? We're the official independent, now a nonprofit steward of the Canton Network. Canton Network has been alive for almost 2 years. Today it's connected to increasing number of institutions, namely DTCC, Euroclear. Those are also co-chair, right, for our foundations. Some of the players that you guys may have heard of, like JP Morgan, HSBC, these are some active players on our chain. Here in Asia, right, I cover the Asia Pacific regions, right, roughly 10 markets, which are getting things started, right. Started with Japan, we're tokenizing Japanese bonds in partnership with Mizuho, right, Nomura, as with Japanese clearinghouses. Moving next door in Korea, we're working with directly, right, with the two biggest financial groups, called Shinhan, KB, which you guys might be familiar with. So for me, right, Vietnam, as a Southeast Asia, has a lot of impact as well potential here to really be coordinated, right, along with the global markets here. So really happy to be here and looking forward to discuss about how we can modernize the financial system in Vietnam.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Tâm, so please share
Pardon, I will speak
yourself.
Vietnamese. Chào tất cả mọi người, em là Vũ Trường Ái Tâm, hiện đang là phát triển kinh doanh tại sàn giao dịch OKX. Hiện tại thì OKX đã có giấy phép hoạt động tại các quốc gia lớn như là Singapore, Úc, châu Âu, Mỹ và một vài thị trường khác. Thì ngày hôm nay đến đây là quê hương của em rồi, nên là hy vọng là OKX sẽ mang lại được những cái thông tin bổ ích cho mọi người. Em cảm ơn.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
And the last one, so please, Mr. Paulo.
Hi, my name is Paulo. I lead partnerships at Chìa Foundation. So Chìa was started by a Korean company called Kakao. So we have a very good base in Korea. And recently, anything that runs crypto on another messenger called Line Messenger runs on our chain essentially. So I guess it's a pretty good distribution channel for Asia. So that's an intro on what we do. Why Vietnam? We've actually done some pilots. Like for example, we've done KB to Korean won to Vietnamese dong pilot last December, embedded in the bank app itself. So we think it's pretty receptive. The Vietnamese market is pretty receptive to these. There's a lot of trade going on from Korea, Japan to Vietnam, Indonesia, whether it's commodities or overseas Vietnamese workers, right? So that's something that we really want to take on, and I'm very excited that the government is very fast, they're very quick, right? They just started. I know our speaker said it was pretty slow, but trust me, after working with Japanese and Korean counterparts, it's pretty fast. So so that's why I'm all in for Vietnam.
Oh, well, thank you. So talk about liquidity. So of course we have to talk about the money flow. So Teddy, your company is a Nasdaq listed company. So what do you think about the point of view from large institutional investor about RWA? Is it too early or is this mature now? So what's your point of view?
Sure. I think that's a very interesting question. I think from my discussion with more than 100 organizations in past few years, from Europe to US toward Asia, real asset is not too early. It's not too early. But the question is where is the money is coming from? Because if you think about the whole investment flow, first you need to have money. Otherwise, you have no source of liquidity to invest. Liquidity is an outcome. It's an outcome of where the money sits and what other products are. And that's where I actually, in our company, we spend a lot of time to invest in Solana and actually work with the ecosystem partner. Because Solana right now is actually processing 30 to 40% of the stablecoin flow. Because if you have the money, then you have the investment, right? So for example, tokenized equities, more than 90% of those tokenized equities are actually happening and transacting using Solana. That is where we take pride of. That is an ecosystem with liquidity. Because you have the user, you have the money, and that is where the liquidity sits. And in the long term, what we see is the industry going forward is I would say a migration. Think about the whole financial infrastructure is a home, it's a residential house. The house we are living in today is built roughly 60 years ago, which means it's very strong that it's still functioning. And blockchain is a new home for them to move to, and where we see actually a lot of innovation happens. Be that stablecoin that Ted just talked about, and all the tokenization work. This actually happens on this new financial infrastructure, and this is how we are seeing the whole liquidity, money flow infrastructure story happening in the blockchain ecosystem, especially on Solana.
Thank you. And Mr. Ramana, I know that you are building payment and stablecoin system in the Middle East. So from your point of view, so which asset will lead the next wave of RWA? What do you think?
Great question. I think before I answer, I need to put in a disclaimer. I'm a career banker. I was a career banker. I've done transaction banking for the last 20 odd years. What we have seen in RWS and RWA tokenization has always been assets which are lower risk, more liquid. So we have seen bonds, we have seen shares. People haven't moved on from there. That goes back to the main question. What are the investors looking for? The investors are looking for two things. Liquid, which means I want to sell it or reclaim it any given point of time. I don't want to be stuck with this token. Two, what is the yield on this token? While bonds and shares have addressed one part of it, they haven't addressed the yield part yet, right? Because when you talk about 3% yield on dollars, 4% yield, people will say, I might as well put it in bank account or FDs, and I get the same money. That's where, as ADA Foundation, we started looking at it from a different perspective. And I put on my transaction banking cap on. Do you know when SME supplies to a large corporate, the large corporate pays back the SME in 90 days, if you're lucky, 120 days to 180 days. You know what SME does? They go to banks, if they are lucky and banks approve them, and they get lending in dollar terms for 18 to 24% a year. That is if the banks pay. If the banks don't pay, private credit is about 3% a month. What we have done is we went back to the buyers and we told them, we want to run an anchor-led supply chain. And guess what? We took all these receivables. We now have 11 mandates we're working on across different types, and tokenize these receivables and actually go to the investors and now tell them, these are bank-grade assets. These are not wrappers. These are proper bank-grade supply chain assets. And I'm telling you, the institutional liquidity loves these assets. And they want to come in, they want to look at these assets, and they want to put it on not on their balance sheet, off balance sheet, through investments into fund structure. That's why it's very important, not just the liquidity, the structure of how the fund and the bankruptcy remote SPV works is very, very important. And I've had these discussions with your VIFC guys, with your local regulators as well. There is immense opportunity for Vietnam because Vietnam coffee suppliers supplying to the buyers in UAE, why do they need to wait for 90 days or 120 days to get their money back? We can actually tokenize these receivables.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Paulo, so I want to ask you a question. So we have money flow, we have assets,
Yes.
and we need real application. So from your point of view, because you are the one who are building ecosystem of application, so what do you think? What has to happen for RWA to reach everyday user by real application? So not only financial products.
I thought you were punishing me because I was talking to my seatmate. Yeah, but I think two things, basically. So right now it's institutional, right? I think that's the first part that businesses have to adopt. After that, we would likely be retail. So as you mentioned, our approach is more with the retail, right? So two things would be, one is distribution. So it has to be accessible, right? So our friends here have already said that liquidity has to be there. It has to be easily redeemable, right? Like what Teddy said. So that's number one, obviously. Number two is distribution. It has to be hyper-locally available. So the trend now that we've seen in crypto, for example, is we have had Telegram come in. We've had other chains and exchanges come up with their own messaging, or retail-facing apps. A lot of them failed, right? So we have learned that we have to introduce this technology into the hands of where people already are. So thankfully, we have that slight advantage with the messenger. So I think that's number two, which is distribution. Put blockchain where people are instead of giving them this hurdle, this friction, right, to adoption. And I think finally would be composability. It's a big word, but what it means, there's no point to putting something on chain and then it stays there. It has to add value, right? Now the value of the blockchain technology is that it's composable. Means, like what Francesco earlier said, right, from Tether, means I can tokenize this maybe gold, I can take a loan against it, and then I generate yield from the gold or appreciation from my asset here, and I can also use it as collateral to borrow more stablecoins or more USD, for example. Now this is very difficult to replicate in TradFi and Web2 markets. But in crypto, this composability, this ability to move money without locking it in or paying extra fees, I think is valuable. And if we introduce this, it'll be more valuable for the retail user. So that's our thesis. We think adoption will only come if it's easily accessible, number one. And number two, if they can have actual value and gains from it.
Okay, thank you. So talk about liquidity. So if the RWA only stay is the area of each firm, so we cannot raise enough liquidity for the whole market. So that's why we need the connection. So Mr. Thomas, you are the expert in privacy network for corporation. So what do you think? What do you think about the standard that we need to create to have the connection to transfer data and asset between different firms? And of course, when we create more liquidity, we still need to protect our data and our safety. So what do you think?
That is a really good question. Before I answer the question, maybe I can see the idea in everyone's minds today, right? For this field, we're talking about institutional adoption for about a while now, right? Last half a year, we've seen the news. I think there's a misconception for that. Often people think that institutions are entering crypto. I think it's more a story around modernization of financial system, right? Thereby becoming on-chain. So it's not the fact that institutions are investing in the crypto asset themselves, right? Sure, that's happening, right, from time to time, partially, but majority of the actual what's happening behind the scene are modernization of the financial system, as we talked about today, right? More like a market structure issue that we will talk about, you mentioned earlier, right? So in terms of standards, right, that we need for institutional adoption, right, I think there's a couple of things. And I think that oftentimes, I think that question you had poses like a choice between my privacy or interoperability, right? Oftentimes people say pick one, but institutions don't really have the luxury to pick one right now as we speak, because they cannot, right, reveal their informations, right, in order to move the asset, nor can they to like refuse to move the asset. So any standard that forces them to make that choice, it's not really a standard, right, they can adopt, right, at scale. So with that being said, I think the constraint here is the whole design itself. I want to take a moment and maybe take a DTCC example, right? DTC, I mentioned earlier, is one of our co-chair for the foundation. And this week, right, we just went live phase 1 with them. For those who don't know what DTCC is, they're the biggest like depository, security depository body, right, within the US. And I know this scale might not be familiar. We talk about billions, often daily basis with crypto, but they actually process quadrillion dollars, right, each year. Roughly 4.5 quadrillion. For those who don't know what quadrillions, that's like 1,000 trillion, right? It's a big number with 15 zeros. So with that being said, they partner with roughly 30 institutions, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, to really tokenize the US Treasury on chain, right? For various like use cases, collateral, repo, et cetera. And story out there, this is not proof of concept or testing, but rather it's in production today. But I want all of us to pay attention here, not really the number or the scale, right? Rather, it's the standard or things that they had to agree, right, in order to make this happen, right, before the first transaction can take actual settle. So first one, let's start with perhaps identity, right? Identity is something that sticks with the asset itself, not necessarily with the institutions. Think about transaction takes place in capital markets today, right? The counterparty is actually verified, right? At the venue, institution, every time it touches. I think the standard for identity that we want to establish here is actually something, let's say I'm an institution, right? I want to be able to prove that he is my counterparty, right? Without really revealing who he is, right? As a person or as a party. A second one is about the privacy, right? As a default. We must have a privacy default for institutional adoption and use select disclosure, right, as the deliberate act here. Only people associated with transaction can see the transaction detail themselves, and that information need to be selected, right? May it be an auditor, may it be a regulator, right? May it be simply a counterparty. So if you can able to do that, right, that's institutional grade privacy with a regulator visibility, right? It's not secrecy, it's not anonymity, right? So oftentimes people confuse like institutional privacy with being anonymous, and that's not the case here. And with privacy, then you need compliance, right? That must be baked with the protocol level itself. It must be, when the transfer happens, right? It must happen at the same time, not reconcile afterwards, right? To really prevent that and the risk itself, reconciliation risk. And lastly, I think the privacy is great, right? The identity is great, but how can we connect all that? It's the coordination layer you mentioned about, right? What we here at Canton Foundation or Canton Network, we call atomic settlement, right? Settlement finality is very, very important here. That means has a legal right outcome with that, right? Even when someone go to defaults. All the four things I just mentioned, right? Whether it's atomic settlements, right? Privacy, as well identity, all these four things are not blockchain, right? They're the properties themselves. Whether it's the institution here in Vietnam or globally, right? You guys can set what the requirements are, specify what those are, right? You should definitely test against them and let the networks, right, compete against them. If you have these modern standards, right, all four categories, the choice is very limited, right? But if you go even one step further and see who is in production, right? The organizations, institutions that you guys want to connect with, the choices become like one, right? In my opinion, that's a Canton network. I want to make sure that we can do the same here with the Vietnamese institution here as well.
Thank you, very, very detailed answer. So my question for the only woman here, Miss Tâm. So I know that OKX has the partnership with VP Bank and to launch the exchange named CAX. So it's a very great news in Vietnam and welcome to Vietnam. So what is your plan? What is the plan of OKX and of course for the joint venture with VP Bank in the next coming years?
Thank you for the questions. First of all, I'm Vietnamese and I'm very bullish with Vietnam forever, right? And being an exchange like OKX and in the future our local partner CAX, we are the bridge between you guys, the institutional and the retail users. So how OKX position ourselves in this partnership is that being experienced with licensing entities and regions, having our global institutional partners and tokenized stock. And also recently we have a joint venture with NYSE, ICE in the US. It also give us experience and exposure to help our local partners, which is a joint venture with VP Bank, CAX, to have more exposure to the global industry. Now talking about RWA, everyone has experience with building a token, but how do we deliver the token to the users, right? We need an exchange. And how the exchange protect the users. I think with OKX and CAX joint venture and collaborations, we want to bring the best RWA to Vietnamese users. And we also want to protect Vietnamese investors as well. Yeah, and that's our plan.
Okay, so I want to ask one more question for the OKX representative. Okay. Because you talk about protect the investor. So this morning, Mr. Hoa from Security Commission mentioned very clearly that of course Vietnam will need a list of products or assets can be tokenized. So if the legal framework is okay, is done and ready. So from your experience of an exchange, so how can you check assets and manage listing to, of course, to keep the innovation, but still keep safety for retail investor?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm not in the position of giving advice to people, right? Like every exchange, they have their own standard. But all the regulators have their own framework, and they also give a very clear guidance on what the exchange should do to list a specific token. So from what we see, right, Japan also have like 2 to 3 months of review a specific token to be listed. Singapore MAS has way faster review as well. And then usually to help the regulator from the exchange perspective, they need to have a very strong and strict listing process. And then if the exchange already have a very good board of listing, they would be able to give advice and then suggest to the regulators that, hey, this is the exchange this is a token or RWA we're gonna list. Who are the people gonna provide liquidity to the tokens? And that would also be the plan to protect the users in the long run. Yeah. Hope
okay,
that
so
answer.
please come back to Mr. Teddy. So RWA and the crypto market, it launched because the government want to attract foreign global capital to contribute to the Vietnamese economics. So from your point of view, you meet a lot of institutional investors. So what do you think that Vietnam need to change or adapt or have the rule or the technology to attract the money flow from the large fund globally? What do you think?
I think this is a very good question. All this financial market infrastructure, not just Vietnam, but every market actually want more investor coming in, right? They want the investor to come here and make direct investment, and however, most of the investors are also thinking, how do I get the most out of it, right? So that needs to be a balance. And for a lot of markets similar to Vietnam, given that we are at the first good stage of growing it, we need to make sure all the investment come here in a controlled manner. As RWA and digital asset evolve, I think actually the key question is, how do we leverage the technology to make sure all the investment coming in here orderly? For example, right, we heard the Middle East and also Vietnam example. It's about empowering the trade finance company to be able to get funding faster. All these things, it actually is investment opportunity. So what I would think is that we need to make sure all this technology are helping the orderly investment. It's not about aggressively coming in but pulling out, right? Because it's not good for the long term. So we do think the orderly control is important. And in terms of offering those investment options, right, it has to be clear. Investors are here for long term, and those are long-term investors that you probably want more as a country. So you have to help them to understand how they can get in and how they can get out. What are the preconditions? What are the requirements? And is there a difference between investor types? And is there a difference between, for example, investment asset? Because, for example, if we are talking about deposit, then people come in here, come out, is very expected, right? But if you're talking about long-term project, like real estate, infrastructure, those are supposed to be long. So what I think is about a tiering sort of structure to make sure things come in easily and go out in a structured manner. So people know the expectation, right? And here is where the blockchain industry can be really helpful, right? You can, for example, not tokenize the asset, but tokenize the cash flow in the future for people to invest into. You can, for example, use the programmability in the blockchain to say in what scenario, once those fulfilled, those capital can be like released. In crypto terms, there are lots of lock up, right? So if you lock up those investment, once those criteria hits, those can release. It's transparency. It's where the blockchain provides people the flexibility. One thing also people underestimate a lot about the power of blockchain. Blockchain is not just about crypto. It's a new financial infrastructure that we all talk about. For example, Solana, as a layer 1, you can configure the privacy. You can configure those programmability so you know when can come in, who are the whitelisted investors, who are the blacklisted. You just need to use the technology for the right use cases. But however, it's a whole country, it's very complicated. We need to think about it carefully by investor sector, by asset type, to make sure there is an orderly structural framework, and then use the technology to support that, implement in an effective manner. So you don't want multiple parties have different way to implement. You can then use blockchain to have a common set of rules to make sure things happen at a way that people expect. Because people don't have trust, then you use blockchain to provide the trust.
Thank you. So a lot of very interesting information, but because our discussion have limits of time, so I want to ask the last question for every speaker here. So of course, that we expect that the first license exchange will be launched this year, and we expect that. And the next one is we really want to see the first RWA deal. So what do you think the most important or the first thing Vietnam has to do or prepare to have the first RWA deal? Of course, I know that everyone will think about the legal framework first, but please choose another one so we can see and have more knowledge from you guys. And I think that we can start from Paulo, okay? So please, Mr.
What's
Paulo.
the question?
One thing that you think that Vietnam should prepare, or the most important thing, to have the first RWA deal in 2026 or 2027?
To have the first RWA yield,
Yeah.
you said? Oh, deal,
Yeah.
RWA deal.
Or the first RWA tokenized from real asset.
It's very hard for me to give this advice because I'm not Vietnamese. I think it boils down to what the biggest use case is. I think from what I learned is we need to learn, we need to be very hyper-local. For example, when we worked with Thailand, they don't like stable coins. They will like purpose-bound money, right? And when I work with Indonesia, they have a distinction between crypto asset and a stable coin, for example, in RWA. In Japan, we have 3 types of stable coins, and the lending, the yield is not an investment product, it's a lending product. I, customer, lend you, foundation or DeFi protocol, my money, you invest it for me, you know? So I think what the best for Vietnam market is, maybe it could be yield, but then we have to learn what's the compliant way of doing it. Is it lending like the Japanese framework? Is the use case more for cross-border payments or remittances? Because you have a lot of workers in Japan, Korea, etc., in Middle East, you know? So as long as you know what the best, easiest way to execute is, then I would go hard on it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Tâm, what?
I think the very first question before I go to this answer is, who gonna invest in it? Let's say we talk about real estate tokenizations. Vietnamese people, they can buy houses, right? They are Vietnamese, they legally buy house. I guess, let's say if we want to do RWA on real estate, which is very potential, and it would gonna be Vietnamese. Vietnam is the only country gonna do it at the moment, right? If we were to, then who and which country can invest in this RWA token? And I think that's gonna be the answer to whether or not it's something Vietnamese or exchanges or institutionals can invest in and then build the very first RWA deal with Vietnam.
Thank you. And what's your point, Mr. Thomas?
I think Sophie touched from a retail perspective, maybe perhaps at one point from a capital markets perspective, right? All depends on which market the Vietnamese as a market, right, want to connect with, right? With that being said, technology is not an issue here. We all can agree here, right? Tokenization is not the ultimate goal here. If we don't do anything with tokenized assets, just sits there, that's the same as having a very expensive spreadsheet, right? So how can we use the tokenized asset, whether it's collateral or mobility, right? Or settle against something or finance a trade any given hour, right? That's the future we're building towards, right? Across the border, across different institutions, under different jurisdictions, right? So that's the future we think we can build, right? Uses technology such as Canton Network, where Vietnam itself can have its own Canton, right? Private version of that, and still connect to a different Canton, right? Whether it's US, Japan, Korea. So I think the connectivity here, coordination piece, is what blockchain brings to the benefits, right? To the world. Less about, once again, the token investment itself. It's more about the unlocking this collateral mobility, coordination layer that was never existed before.
Yeah. And Mr. Rabada?
So I think let's go back and take a step back, because what is more important, you talked about legal structure. I want to go into the nuance of very important things that you have to take care before RWA. One, what does the token mean? Is the token ownership of an asset, or is the token economic value of what is coming out of the asset? Very, very important to differentiate a junior token, a senior token, and a token backed by first loss default guarantee, a token full of risk. These are most important mandatory steps you do. The second part of the story is local law versus common law. If you have assets sitting in Vietnam and you want to tokenize, you need to put it in a vehicle that is common law. Otherwise, nobody is going to come and invest in a token that is local law, because it becomes very difficult for people to access. The third one, very, very important, I know that Vietnam is not looking at stablecoin, and I would humbly request that you should, because of the reserve management and the atomicity of settlement. You have agreed to do a deal. I'm an investor and I bought the token. It has to be settled real time. It has to come into my custody real time. I have to give you the money real time. If it doesn't happen, somebody is losing. Why should that happen, right? And hence it is very important to have a token backed by a stablecoin, which is always the most important part of reserve management, which means you have issued stablecoin, but do you have the liquidity? Whenever people want it, can this token be put in the liquid form and obtained? And one of the last things I want to leave, and I'll be slightly controversial, real estate, I don't think is the first asset you should look at. Because real estate is a great asset, but not a liquid asset. Real estate takes ages for you to generate yield. I am a big believer of 3 to 6 months trade finance receivables or nostro payments, or anyone who is doing cross-border settlement by pre-funding the nostros. You should look at these assets. These are real assets. These are something on the table. People look at it. People see it. Real estate is as fluctuating as a Bitcoin, in my humble opinion.
Okay, so
Thank you.
and the last opinion, so Mr.
I
Teddy.
promise I will keep it very short. But I think I actually learned a lot. I think everyone has great insights. I actually echo a lot. If we focus on liquidity, we have to look for assets that people can easily invest. Think about deposit. I don't have to think, and I can just buy deposit. Think about real estate. Trust me, buying my home took me 2 years, right? It's a long time process because you actually worry about liquidation and it's a big investment. Fictionalization helps, but the uncertainty of the secondary market, of the price changes, you're actually nervous. So, like, if you're looking for liquidity, go easy. Highly liquid asset, money market fund, ultra short, whatever, fixed income, that would give you liquidity. But what I think is most important is actually what I call that is the programmable assets. Because you are actually not trying to make everyone who can buy it, you only want the eligible investor who can buy it. So you need to leverage the programmability to control who can buy it, who can sell it, at what condition that we talked about earlier on. And then more importantly, like, for example, you can even control about the different transactions because you want to make that composable with other protocol. Because if you're doing tokenization, you are not looking for issuance. If issuance, you can just use the Oracle database. You can get a very big size right away, 100 trillion today. But if you're using blockchain for tokenization, you want distribution reach, where you need the programmable asset, where you need the asset of like many users. Second, you need the composability for utility, for that being used as a collateral for lending. All these things are important. New features are needed for new users to come in.
Okay, and I remember a quote from the director of Tether before, so no companies can do RWA alone. And here in Vietnam, so VBA will continue try to connect the whole system from the governments to private company and global investor and partners. And thanks to our guests for very interesting information today. And thanks for all the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.